Hello everybody, I hope you're all well and that you've had a lovely Easter. Thank you for supporting and subscribing, it's really appreciated. I'm the introverted astrologer and today I want to have a quick look at Nigel Farage and the UK Reform Party. Now we have some local elections coming up on the 1st of May and the question is, will the Reform Party perform well? There has also been a rather public falling out between Nigel Farage and Richard Lowe. Can we find out a bit more about that too? Let's have a look. Let's kick this off with Nigel's progressions. I'll pull you over to his progressed moon first, because this had caught my eye last July when we had the national elections. At that time his progressed moon was at around 5 degrees of Pisces, and so I knew it was very shortly going to oppose this Uranus. It would also simultaneously square that midheaven. I did think that he would become successful in running to be an MP, and that proved correct. But I rather wondered what this opposition to Uranus would be about. And I wondered in retrospect if it would be because the Reform Party won so few seats. I know many of my viewers were disappointed too, because this party received so many votes across the UK, but only ended up with 5 seats. Labour had a majority of 411 seats, and so I know some of you were very disappointed with that outcome. Was this opposition to Uranus and the square with the midheaven expressing some of this energy? When the moon links up with Uranus in this way, we can often have a few weeks of certainly feeling very alive, but there is often something also unexpected, unpleasantly surprising, or up in the air. We can feel a little over-tuned in and very unsettled. If we look harder at this progressed moon now, we can see that it's in the angular 7th house, and that's good because this is a relatively strong house. And this progressed moon is about to conjunct with Chiron. Chiron too is strongly placed because it's just 4 degrees away from the descendant. In fact, this whole dynamic is speaking of an immensely strong desire to reform as part of Nigel's personality. Societal reforms or improvements are a big focus in his life. There are other more personal characteristics, but we're interested in Nigel's political progress at this point, and I think it's a good sign that his moon is in this position. I have previously analysed Nigel's basic birth chart, and I'll put a link for that video below in the description box. Now, Chiron is the wounded healer. I think the conjunction will bring about opportunities to assuage any doubts that Nigel might have about himself. This passing conjunction lasts just a few weeks and it's almost exact on the 1st of May. I'm taking this as a very good omen. Now we can see that this progressed moon has very recently been square with the progressed sun. This is telling us that Nigel has entered the last quarter in his lunation cycle. This would have been exact around 3 months ago, and at the time of this square being formed, we can sometimes encounter a difficulty or a certain tension which requires us to adjust and reorientate somewhat. And 4 months previously, the progressed moon would have been opposing this natal Pluto. Now, although this Pluto is close to the ascendant and is therefore strengthened, it does lose a little bit of that strength, relatively speaking, because it's moving retrograde. And so we can identify that there would have been a period spanning somewhere between December and throughout the first couple of months of this year, where there would have been certain tensions, conflicts, and feeling as though the rug was being pulled from under our feet. If we track back, of course, we can see that there was quite a lot of media attention earlier this year because Musk had posted something to the effect that he didn't believe Nigel Farage had what it took to be leader of the Reform Party. There have also been tensions within the party, and the former Reform MP, Richard Lowe, lost the whip in March, and this has been a very public falling out, which has played out across the media too. Rupert has since announced that he will be suing Nigel. And so all of this is very stressful stuff. I will show you Nigel and Rupert Lowe's relationship charts shortly so you can make your own mind up. Now, by the time we get to 2029, which is the most likely year for the next general election, which must be held by August of 2029, we can see that the progressed descendant will be just around 27 odd degrees of Aries, and so it's going to conjunct with this natal Jupiter. By this point, the progressed midheaven too will be around 6 degrees of Leo, and so there will be a trine to the relatively powerful asteroid called Pallas Athena. Pallas can be a most strategic and intelligent opponent in battle. There is a search for justice, and placed so strongly on his fourth house cusp, you can see how themes of justice related to homeland, to roots, are so significant. And so the movement by 2029 of these progressed angles is initially looking promising, but I would have to look at the full picture, and especially the UK chart too, closer to the time. There are a couple of transits that Farage has operating this year, and in fact one of them has already made its first pass. And so we're looking at Saturn. Saturn has just begun lengthy transit to Nigel's natal moon, and it won't be too long before it goes on to form a sextile with his natal Venus. Now, both of these points are going to be lengthy exercises because Saturn will go retrograde, of course, and will catch these points again. So they will be ongoing until next year. Now, what are they telling us? The square to the moon can sometimes be difficult. It's as though we have two competing priorities. Saturn, on the one hand, is the planet that is urging us to be responsible, realistic, dutiful, to work hard, to accept restrictions that we may need to bow to in order to achieve goals. And the moon is none of these things. The moon is our need for emotional interplay. It speaks of our vulnerability and our feeling life. And under this particular transit, these two very different areas of life compete for priority, but both cannot be met at the same time. We can end up with a rather emotionally dissatisfying period of repressed or unacknowledged emotional needs. This can be lonely. It might be a period of such hard work that we are unable to recognise our very human need for an emotionally satisfying life. Sometimes we may not get on very well with the people around us on an emotional level, and this can cause us sadness or feelings of alienation. It isn't necessarily an easy time. As Saturn is also moving through the 7th house of our formal relationships, and so under this kind of pressure we might need to consider how our formal relationships or long-term partnerships are working, because they could suffer under this kind of pressure. That simultaneous sextile to Venus is confirming the need to get real in relationships. They can run smoothly at this time, provided we are able to take stock of them, to assess how they're fulfilling our needs and whether we are indeed meeting our own obligations in relationships, and then to take concrete steps to put that right. Above all, Saturn is always very realistic and speaks of concrete actions. So this input from Saturn could be rather sobering for Nigel. However, Uranus is going to move into Gemini very soon, and just before it gets there, it's going to form a conjunction with Nigel's Venus. It will then move on to square with his Saturn. And my goodness me, this is going to shake everything up. It may well be something that plays out in Nigel's private life, but Uranus is going to inject a great deal of excitement and a lightning fast speeding up in personal relationships. The square between Uranus and Saturn could be somewhat disruptive. Saturn, of course, is saying something about the structures and routines in our life, the things that we take for granted that normally run smoothly, and so we settle into these patterns and assume they'll always be that way. When Uranus comes along to challenge this, the building tension can be quite something. And so if there are ways where we have said yes or bent a little to accommodate others, even though we don't really want to, then we will have an intense need to break free of such restrictions. We could take the people around us quite by surprise, because we may not be able to tolerate behaviours or relationships that don't work for us, and in fighting to break free of them, we might behave in quite uncharacteristic ways. The initial contact from transiting Uranus will be summertime, June, July and August for the first contact. Now we know that Neptune is moving through the first few degrees of Aries. It won't be until 2026 that it will conjunct with Nigel's natal Mars, and we'll have to see how this plays out. Mars is the part of our psyche that says something about how we go out and get the things we want in life, how we pursue our own interests. And Neptune coming along is going to confuse this whole picture, because Neptune is not self-interested. Neptune can even be rather sacrificial, and we might well see Nigel's scope widening a bit so that he is more inclined to pursue things which are for a collective good or which help other people in the more charitable sense of the word. Because Nigel has an April birthday, this is ideal for giving us a feel of how he might make progress in this May's elections and over this year generally. We have his standalone solar return here, cast at the moment that the Sun returned to the exact natal degree over the skies of Farnborough. And in my opinion, this is a reasonably good return. I'm not too concerned about the house placements, and I think it's a good sign that we have Jupiter together with the Moon. This Sun is very prominent because it is angular, it is squaring out to the ascendant-descendant axis, and it too is forming an aspect with Jupiter. If we look much more closely though for some very near exact aspects, we can see that Saturn and this first house Mars are in a very close aspect. So we can anticipate very carefully considered, strategic, precise application of will, of great self-discipline and resilience. And with Uranus involved, this could also be saying something about opportunities for social reform. Here we have Nigel's natal chart in the centre, his birth chart, and I've placed those solar return planets around the outside. You can see that we've got this really strong emphasis because the midheaven of the solar return is falling exactly on the 7th house cusp, quite close to that Chiron. So Nigel's formal relationships are going to be intensely important during this next 1 year period. And so party relationships, potentially also personal relationships, are going to occupy his attention a lot. I'll also add, incidentally, that the transiting North Node is slowly reversing through Pisces now, and so that too is going to reverse over Nigel's 7th house cusp and bring up all the energy of this strong configuration. When the North Node crosses over one of our angles, this can often bring important events into our life, and I think this could well be something that plays out in a significant event or new partnership that starts in the last couple of months of this year, or maybe the first month or two of 2026. Now, the things I've seen so far would incline me to suspect that Farage will be doing well in these May elections. But I'll also bring in his lunar return for the month. So it covers the election period and it confirms a certain happiness. It isn't perfect and there are some tensions in it too. But the sign that's being brought to our attention is Gemini. And of course, Gemini rules Nigel's natal midheaven, which you can see on the right. Jupiter on the ascendant is promising. And if you look to the right, you can see that the lunar return sun is actually aligning quite closely with Farage's own natal Jupiter, the part of fortune. And that asteroid we've already discussed, Pallas Athena, is also on the midheaven of the return. And so I think this all looks very promising. Lastly, let's have a quick look at the charts of Richard Lowe and Nigel Farage. What is the chemistry between them telling us? Is there anything we can identify that would have indicated this might not be an ideal professional relationship? Now, we don't have a birth time for Richard Lowe, so we're not going to be able to take houses into consideration, and we'll have to be very careful with the moon too. We can see from the chart on the right, with Richard Lowe's planets on the inside, that he has a Scorpio sun. There'll certainly be an Aquarius moon, and he certainly has a lot of fixed and cardinal placements. And so we'd expect somebody possibly headstrong, obstinate, with very substantial staying power. I've put Nigel's planets around the outside of this chart in red, and you can see that Nigel's moon meets up quite closely with Rupert's Venus, and so we could certainly see pulling together between these two men out of mutual affection. There would be a genuine warmth towards each other. There would be basic chemistry between the two personalities, and Moon Venus can go a great way towards acting with very good manners, civility, courtesy towards each other, effortlessly. So what went wrong? One problem could be that Rupert's Saturn is very closely square to Nigel's ascendant-descendant axis. Moreover, this same Saturn is also therefore square to that Pluto. Now this could arouse an energy which could potentially be domineering, a jostling for position, a certain power and control dynamic. But if we look even further, we can see that Nigel's Saturn is opposing Rupert's Pluto. This means that we have a double whammy of some rather unfortunate energy. Issues of one-upmanship, of attempting to control, potentially bringing in all those games that people can play with control, including manipulation, violation of trust. All of these things are possible. But it gets worse because we can see that Farage's Mercury is at around 2 degrees of Taurus, which means it is exactly opposed by Richard Lowe's Neptune. Focus in on Farage's Neptune and you can see that is within a few degrees of Richard Lowe's Mercury. And so we have another double whammy. And this really is a very confusing kind of influence to have in a professional relationship where trust and clarity are needed. It would be most difficult even in a personal relationship, given its doubly strong influence. And so we have these joint issues where we have problems with power and control, but we could also have confused, evasive, or potentially just downright dishonest communication between the two men. And under the circumstances, it would take some very painstaking work by impartial people to try to pick apart what truly took place. The composite chart here on our left is reiterating this unfortunate energy because we can see the Neptune in this composite precisely square with Mercury. It really is a rather intense composite chart. And with Saturn falling closely together with the Sun, and very likely the Moon too, it's possible that the relationship is going to contain a learning curve for both parties. Saturn requires that we are very realistic, that we live up to obligations and responsibilities. And in a composite chart, it can show that we may find out a great deal about ourselves by interacting with the other person. These relationships can have a certain limited quality to them. It doesn't mean that they have to be short-lived, but they may feel somewhat confining, and we may need to encounter parts of ourselves that aren't altogether pleasant, and facing the truth about ourselves can sometimes be difficult. If we can cope with the kind of discipline that Saturn is bringing into the relationship, then it doesn't have to be a short-term meeting, friendship or relationship, but we would possibly have to act with great discipline if we were intent on making this relationship last over the longer term. Thank you for watching. Good luck to all of you who are voting this year. And until next time, take care. God bless you and your loved ones, and keep you safe.